Marvel Rivals is finally out, and literally not even a day into its full release, the role lock conversation became the biggest talking point around it. This is a topic that Overwatch has been dealing with for about 5 years now, and also experimenting with recently, so it's the most relevant it's been in a while. Today I want to talk about role queue and role lock, and go into a little more detail about when they work and when they don't. I don't think the answer is as simple as one is better than the other, and I also don't think every game needs the same solution. The best place to start this conversation, in my opinion, has to be at the very beginning. No limits. Overwatch's very first iteration not only had no limits on roles, but also on heroes. You could have 6 Winstons all jumping the backline at once if you really wanted. Now, I think that 99% of Overwatch players will agree that hero limit was an absolute net positive, but I think it's a good starting point for changes that would come in the future. Objectively, no limits is the absolute height of creativity in terms of team composition and play style. Quite literally, there are no limits on what you can do when you are crafting a team comp. Of course, in the early days, no one knew how to play and were doing literally whatever, and that kind of came through, but very quickly a problem arose. The first season of Comp had a pretty defined meta of 2 Winstons, 2 Tracers, and 2 Lucios. Only 3 of the original 21 were played. Doesn't really scream variety and freedom to me. That's the problem with this format. If any characters are outliers, not only is it more valuable to pick them multiple times, it's even more valuable to pick multiple of the characters that enable them. It is very, very easy for the freedom of choice fantasy to shatter without perfect balance, and trust me, early Overwatch was not focused on that. I understand that it's been a long time since Overwatch operated like this, and Marvel Rivals never has or will, but I think the context is important because what sounds good on paper doesn't always equate to what happens in game. So of course, Overwatch operated with hero limits only for years until GOATS brought into question if it was really viable. Now, I am of the opinion that I do not think role lock was the only solution to killing GOATS. The balance changes attempting to get rid of them were fairly misguided. The argument against role lock gameplay-wise always was about freedom of composition. Being able to freely swap between roles and being able to create wacky compositions is part of the appeal of Overwatch, and role lock removes a lot of that. It brings some skill expression out of the game, and the limits make it a worse game to play casually as well. It really was a big turning point going forward that somehow made the game more contained and less chaotic to focus on more competitive games, while also reducing the skill ceiling of that competitive side. And it absolutely was the right call. I think that even though the freedom of composition and the idea that a solution is out there is super endearing, it just isn't viable to balance as the game expands. Using the 42 heroes that Overwatch has now, assuming 6v6 role lock, the possible combination of team comps is 5,250,960. If you don't have role lock, that number is 3,776,965,920. Obviously, not every single combination of characters is going to be viable, but it becomes wildly impractical to account for all outcomes. Even if they were able to keep GOATS under control, it was only a matter of time before the next insane strategy would take a stranglehold on the game. I'm of the firm opinion that less options allows you to really engage with the minutia of what's there, because there isn't some golden goose solution of a magic team comp that will fix the problem. It always comes down to mastering your play and mastering the systems that are already there. Ironically, I think the best evidence that supports this is GOATS. Outside of some map-specific substitutions, you played the same 6 characters over and over and over for a year, and many people adored GOATS. It taught the Overwatch community how to really play the game. Every individual microplay mattered. Every min-max put you that much closer to winning. Knowing exactly what your opponent is capable of allows you to form better strategies around it. Now, the problem with this is that the lack of variety really gets to you after a while, so I obviously don't think a 1-1-1-1-1-1 hero-specific format would work. A role lock format, however, gets you in that sweet spot of competitive strategy, but also the variety and freedom. For Overwatch, that was absolutely necessary. We also have to talk about the other elephant in the room, queue times. Now, the solution Overwatch went with for role lock meant that you queued up for specific roles and the game predetermined what you would play during the match. The problem with this is that if any role is more popular than the others, queue times become a nightmare, and we all know how it played out in Overwatch. When you have almost the majority of your roster as DPS, naturally that's going to be the most crowded role. There is plenty to be said about the gameplay experience of the other roles having influence over their popularity, but I think the most important factor is a pure numbers game. We're talking about hero shooters. People are going to gravitate towards characters they like, and it's just statistically more likely someone will find a character in the DPS role. And since roles are locked, if their character gets picked first, the easiest way to make sure you aren't going to suffer is to make sure your second character pick is on that same role. So it disincentivizes trying other roles because it means you need to be proficient on 2 characters there, so for a lot of people, it's a large hurdle. Separate ranks does help with this a little as there's less punishment for trying other roles, but it doesn't do nearly enough to get people playing those other roles, and it does nothing for quick play. Now you could have a role lock system without a role queue where once everyone has picked in the 2-2-2 format, you would be locked in. You could even have a request swap feature so you aren't actually completely stuck on one role, you just have to agree to change. But you absolutely could be stuck on one role, and this means that if you want to have the best chance of having fun, you need to play at least 3 characters, 1 per role, and ideally 6 characters, 2 per role. Of course, this is from the perspective of someone who wants to play a very limited pool of heroes. Personally, there's only like 6 characters in the whole game I would be uncomfortable playing. People with larger hero pools probably don't care with either format in this regard. Maybe they feel a little limited, but if you have a limited pool, role lock is much more enticing. You are much more likely to be able to play what you want since you're only competing with one other person for it, not 5. I've also been avoiding one important reason why role lock is preferred for most people because I think it comes with an interesting design conundrum. It's no secret that these games are designed to have a mix of all the roles, and not having one of them can feel really frustrating. You need characters to take space, provide utility and healing, or provide raw damage and kill threat. In open queue, any character regardless of role can do some of these tasks. Mei can take and hold space, and Roadhog can be a lot more of a DPS threat. But it's much more likely in this format that you may miss one of these elements, or you'll have a bad combination of them, likely because you have too many of one role. Role lock encourages character archetypes to be much more role specific. Part of the stability of knowing you have 2 in each role is in part due to the characters in each role providing somewhat similar value to each other. But this isn't always the case because many of the characters designed for open queue and the more freeform style are forced into a position they may not be proficient in. See Roadhog. So while it's much more likely to have a good game in role lock, it absolutely is no guarantee. And 5v5 somewhat exacerbates this issue with only 1 tank. Role lock is only a perfect solution if the game is initially designed around it or serious revisions are made to the existing roster to make it work. And honestly, that really just isn't feasible. I think it was a net positive for Overwatch, but it absolutely has its drawbacks that should not be ignored. Finally here, we need to talk about the average experience and how that has to be considered. We can talk a lot about organized and professional play, but we also have to consider this game is enjoyed 99.99% of the time by people queuing online, regardless of your rank. Even if the experience in organized play is absolutely peak, if queuing for games sucks or is wildly inconsistent, something has to change. As much as we want the highest level of play possible, if no one actually plays the game, they probably won't want to watch it either, and that affects the amount we can experience that peak play. Role lock made the game much more enjoyable much more often, and that encourages the average person to play more, and the average experience determines the success of a game much more than anything else. There is always the argument about not balancing around lower level players and balancing only around high level play because lower level players generally don't know what they're doing, but you do need a player base. Professional players know how to adapt and play to new formats while casual audiences don't. I want the game to be as skillful and fun as possible, and I have been very critical when the skill ceiling is lowered to raise the skill floor, but sometimes we do need to pick our battles. My ideal solution, of course, would be in-game tutorials and really deep dives into how you play some of these characters, but I know that's not realistic and would take way too much dev time. Role lock, I think, is a very easy compromise to make in this department. Okay, finally, with all that out of the way, it's time for us to talk about Rivals. After that entire spiel, does Rivals need role lock? Absolutely not. This is not a competitive game, and it absolutely shouldn't be, and it definitely isn't trying to be. Character power is through the roof, there are seasonal buffs that randomly make characters better, and the team-up abilities are an insane concept that are impossible to balance and make fun at the same time. I mean, there are 18 duelists out of the 33 characters, and there are definitely more on the way. It's a recipe for disaster in the making. Not to mention that tank and support design can be a little uninteresting compared to Overwatch, which would make it hard to force people to play those roles. The community of Rivals wants to play the silly superheroes with no restrictions, and I think that they should have that. I like Rivals, and I have my gripes with it, but forcing role lock into this game, I just don't think would work. It's not lost on me that I get through this entire 5-page script just for me to reach the conclusion of, nah, but I think that this was a good excuse to talk about the things with role lock that are less discussed. I know getting 5 of one role sucks, but the resulting spiral of design flaws that would open up because of role lock can truly not be foreseen, especially in this game. Plus, the devs have already said that they're not going to do it, which to me was glaringly apparent from the start. So thank you for taking this journey with me, and I hope for the sake of Rivals that this conversation stays in the Overwatch sphere where we've definitely been around the block before. And if you like this video, please subscribe for more, and also leave a comment down below about which format you prefer and if you think Marvel Rivals actually does need role lock. Like the video while you're at it, but also I stream live at twitch.tv/Lane Hemingway. That's Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. I'm always doing Overwatch discussions live, as well as just kind of playing the game for fun. Next year is going to be a very big year for me, so if you want to keep up to date with everything I'm doing, please join my Discord. It is the best way to keep up with the Lane Hemingway news. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and please have a good day.